But first of all, let me welcome everyone from near and far. Our workshop today, the original description was that we were going to include multiple generations, but then we found out due to federal regulations around who can be in a classroom, and this is considered a classroom, that only students, in fact, we would have had alumni if we were in Santa Barbara, where I've been every year since 2009. It's no one's looking at. I mean, it's still for students, obviously, and alumni who could register, but for our virtual session, students only. So then we reconfigured this and we said we'll do our our dialogue and create a participatory action project, because what we're actually doing here is we're experimenting with a version of World Cafe, which was created by a Fielding alum, Juanita Brown, I believe her husband as well. And so we'll talk a little bit before we go into our breakout rooms and discuss, have two questions. You'll all be in one of four rooms, and I'll be introducing our faculty team, and one of them will be in each of the rooms with you. And then you stay in that room, and the faculty shift, so you'll have a second faculty team member for the second breakout room. So you stay in your room, and the faculty rotate. Normally in a World Cafe, there's a moderator or note taker, and then the participants leave. So here again, we're adapting to, making the best use of our Zoom technology to be able to do a World Cafe, and make it work for Zoom. So this is participatory action research that we're doing right now. The dialogue facilitation will be about taking our two questions, which will be presented by Harry Moody, who I know is Rick Moody. But first, I want to introduce the progenitor of the CoGenerations project. And as I introduce each of our faculty, I'll tell you just a little bit about them, and you can look up. In fact, I want to put, I can't go off, well, I think I can, but I want to put the website for Rick Lathrop, who came to us in our Creative Longevity and Wisdom group just probably, oh my gosh, maybe only less than a year ago. Maybe the dialogue around this project started close to a year ago. But Rick Lathrop is a HOD alum, got his master's in 1994 from Fielding. So he goes way back in his affiliation. And through his master's, got the idea for doing founding and directing the Global Services Corps. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you now if you unmute yourself. And probably people should be muted unless you're speaking. When you're in the breakout groups, of course, we want you to be unmuted, and if possible, have your video on. But if you need to have video off, that's fine, and to unmute while we're just doing our introductions here. So Rick.
Thanks a lot, Connie. Yes, during my mid-career HOD doctoral program between 92 and 94, I studied participatory action research, and particularly international development and the Peace Corps. And I was very impressed by the record of the Peace Corps. I learned from the studies I looked at that 80 to 90% of all returned Peace Corps volunteers stayed involved in either domestic or international service the rest of their lives. And I was quite interested in international affairs, and I wondered, could I help other people have that kind of experience by creating a mini Peace Corps that wouldn't require the year and a half that the Peace, or 2.5 years that the Peace Corps did. So really, with the assistance of Fielding faculty and student advisors and a small Fielding grant, I launched Global Service Corps, which I'm going to refer to as GSC, in 1993 as a short-term Peace Corps type of experience for adults. I withdrew from my doctoral studies after finishing my master's to work full-time on the development of GSC, and have been doing that for the last 27 years. So we started with nothing really, and very little experience. And I say we because my wife was a full partner with me from the beginning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Global Service Corps because I had a recent conversation with a nationally recognized high school youth environmental activist. And he indicated, I think if you connect the work of CoGeneration Project to GSC, you'd get a lot more interest among youth. So I'll talk a little bit about GSC so you know a bit about it. So PAR, participatory action research, really was the basis for a lot of the work I did, developing community service and service learning experiences for our volunteers. We had about 2,000 volunteers over this period of time in 7 different developing country programs. Interestingly, the age of most of those volunteers, probably 85% of it, was between 18 and 30. And one of the things that really was a big event in our life was we developed cross-sectoral HIV/AIDS, nutrition, food security, rural training programs in East Africa, which led to $2 million worth of grants, including grants from USAID, and helped us transition from a largely volunteer program to a full-blown international development organization in Tanzania, and we operated that way through 2017. We then moved our program primarily to Cambodia and worked on that for 3 years until we had to shut that down because of COVID in March of 2020. And at the same time we were shutting down, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and you may have heard a little bit about some of the happenings in Portland. A lot of the protests in Portland made national news, and you may have noticed that they were largely led by youth. And initially they were concerned with the issues of police brutality and racial justice or racial injustice, but it uncovered a lot of other discontent of youth in many other areas. And I began thinking, well, I'm not doing GSC anymore. How can the experience we've had in GSC be applied to assist youth in meeting their needs? So this idea of the CoGeneration Project came forth, collaborating for the common good through dialogue, mutual mentoring, and engagement, which we envisioned to be primarily youth-driven, but supported by older generations. So through a past connection and good friend and longtime GSC supporter, fielding Professor Emeritus Don Bushnell, who was my advisor, through him, I was led to Rick Moody, or Harry Moody as we know him today, and to Connie and to David, to other fielding students, both past and present faculty. We developed an advisory group for the CoGenerations project and began Zoom meetings, including a young adults advisors meeting in June. I've always felt that the collaboration with fielding was going to be very important. And in July, we had an opportunity to hold an alumni summer session, listening to youth, where we had a few youth participate. And that helped us identify the 4 main issues of concern to youth that we found thus far that were listed in the description of our event today, and we'll be talking about that later. But some other key findings we had, 2 key ones that I thought were important, and that is that the youth said to us, if they're going to participate in the CoGeneration project, they're going to have to see a value to them personally. It's not going to be something they just want to talk about. And they want to know that if they're going to participate, that the older generations that are participating are fully committed to collaborating to address these concerns of theirs. So during this time, we also had conversations with President Katrina Rogers, and she's very supportive of this idea. As a matter of fact, she'd like to see fielding host a intergenerational dialogue conversation, emphasizing listening to youth. So we're looking forward to that. So we did initial networking. We've done several presentations about the CoGeneration projects to various organizations. We've developed a mailing list and a curated selection of articles and websites. And we came up with an initial project idea that we could perhaps assist the teachers and students that are having such a challenge with virtual learning here in Portland, Oregon. And I started reaching out to them and found out that they are just overwhelmed, the teachers and the students. And this probably just isn't the time to ask them to take on a new project. However, it is a possibility in the future. And in the meantime, Connie and I and others have been talking about the possibility of developing a training for older adults on dialogue and mutual mentoring, and we'll be able to discuss that a little further in our sessions. So presently, we are in the process. We're just starting to launch the website for the cogeneration projects. We're going to host it on the Global Service Corps site to begin with. We began working on social media, and we're also thinking about funding. We did receive a grant of $5,000 for Global Service Corps that the funder said he'd be willing for that to become a grant that could be a matching grant to help support some of the Global Service Corps and cogeneration expenses. And as I said, collaborating with Fielding and the tremendous resources, which include all of you, has always been a big priority in this project. Everything from possibly developing knowledge areas to drawing on the incredible scope of experience of both faculty, you students, and alumni. So I'm looking forward to having time with all of you to discuss that further. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rick. That's so inspiring, and it was great to hear about that grant that could be a match. That's always really important. So, I'm going to next introduce Dr. Harry. Officially, he's Harry, but also Rick Moody. I think Rick must be his middle name, and that's how I know him as a mentor, colleague, friend. He received a Creative Longevity and Wisdom Award from Fielding at the very beginning of the CLW initiative and has been a faculty fellow and worked with many of our students really as a volunteer. We're very grateful to him. He's the author of some seminal books, one of the major textbooks in gerontology called Aging Concepts and Controversies, and also Five Stages of the Soul, which was very instrumental in my, and will continue to be in my journey through life. And most recently working on books on dreams and also legacy, which one of the readings that we sent you comes from his book coming out now. So Rick is going to talk about the two questions that will frame our two breakout sessions, and then I will, oops, you know what? I reversed the order because I was looking at my notes here. Actually, why don't you go ahead and do that? And then David will just highlight the four topics that Rick Lathrop talked about that the youth were interested in. We're going to integrate all of those four areas across the two breakouts because the questions we're using really can address any of those areas. But Rick, why don't you talk about the idea of how we've come up with the frame for the two questions?
I want to say how grateful I am for the people who are on this call. I've read little bits of your biography and questions that you are concerned about. And I think that what I'm looking forward to is hearing from people, much less anything that I have to say. I also want to say that I was very gratified that now President Biden, the very end of his remarks, he spoke about the future and about our legacy to future generations, which is the topic that I'm primarily concerned about, partly because I've just finished writing a book on that subject. But the other thing that I want to put out here, and then I want to move to David, who will talk about the specific subjects. We had people of many different ages, many different generations represented at that inaugural ceremony. And it raises the question that President Biden actually said, how do you bring all these people together? And we're experiencing a huge trust deficit in America right now. And that issue of radical distrust affects many different segments of society and certainly affects age groups. And so the question that we want to think about is there radical distrust among generations, among different age groups? And how do we respond to that? And the second point is, how do we respond with hope? And that implies confronting some of our fears. So hope and fear is really the second set of issues that we're going to be talking about. But to make that very specific, David Willis will address the specifics of this.
Thank you so much, Rick and Connie. Really powerful introductions here and the work that you all have done. I'm not going to take too long because we do want to get into the breakout rooms right away. But I would like to share, we were talking about what should be the topics of our conversation going forward here. And we came up with these. I'm just going to share my screen here quickly. We came up with these topics in the breakout rooms. Certainly right now, we could, the climate change, global warming is so powerful. It's happening everywhere. I'm in Kobe, Japan right now, as you all may know, and the plum blossoms have come out a month early here. This is a serious set of issues around the environment, which we all share. Social justice, of course, the racism, the classism, sexism, ableism, ageism, and it could go on and on. But the questions of social justice are possible topics also in the breakout rooms. Economic inequities, including the lack of jobs and educational opportunities. Public health, especially the lack of adequate health care, particularly in the midst of this terrible pandemic, which we are experiencing. Yesterday, the numbers went in the United States beyond 400,000 dead. The worldwide losses are over 2 million, as I understand. We have a lot of work to do. And I really think it's important for us to look back. Indigenous folks like to look back 7 generations and look forward 7 generations. And I think it's always important for us to keep that in mind and in our hearts. And this is the work of our hearts. It's the work of our hands. It's the work of our head. So the head, heart, hands, we always want to keep those in mind. And I want to end my comments here, and these will be the topics in the breakout room. So you might make a note: the environmental issues, social justice, economic inequities, public health. And our moderators, we will move between the rooms. We'll be with you, and then we'll move to the other room. But you will all stay in the same room, as Connie mentioned earlier. I'd like to thank one of you, Deb Bucci, for sharing with us. We missed the poet laureate. She talked right after Garth Brooks. I was so happy to see Garth, one of my favorite singers. And thank you, Deb Bucci, for the words of Amanda Gorman, our poet laureate today. There is always light, if only we are brave enough to see it, if only we are brave enough to be it. So this is a good call for all of us. I'll put this in the chat too, so we can all see this. So those are my thoughts, and I'm so happy Pablo is here today. Thank you, Pablo. He did a seamless transitions yesterday in the session yesterday that Keith, Melville, and Katrina and all had. So yeah, I'll stop the share and share this in the chat here with you all.
Great. Well, I've reconstructed the time frame just a little bit. So our first breakout room, and again, everyone will stay in their room. The faculty team leads will rotate. So once we go into our breakouts, the faculty team leads are note takers, and they'll make sure that each of you, say, hi, Deb, where are you zooming in from, just so everybody knows. And then probably when we switch, we'll maybe do that again, so each of us know who's in the room. And then it's really open dialogue about each question, and the topics that you've all had some readings on, whether you've had a chance to look at all of them or not. But we sort of curated some things that we thought would be helpful for our dialogue. So can you all see back there again? So we'll go into our breakouts. The first question: is there radical mistrust across generations? That'll be 15 minutes. And then the faculty will switch. We'll just take that as a minor break. Don't go very far. Come back in. And then again, introductions, just brief go around. And the second question: how can generations share and build hopes and dreams for the future? Then we'll come back together, and it's called the harvest. Each of the 4 of us we'll just give a encapsulation for, question one, and then we'll go to question two. And then the remaining time, which we'll officially do till 11 Pacific, but we're ready to stay on if anyone wants to continue, given that we started later than anticipated. And we'll get to those topics when we get there. So, Pablo, are we ready for the breakouts?
Yes, and I will start the timer as soon as everyone is in the room.
Okay. And the timer is for how many minutes did I tell you to do it for?
15 each.
Okay, 15 each. Yeah. Yeah. So the second one we might have a little extra time, but we'll try to wrap in 15 minutes. Great. Okay. See you all when we're back together or in the small groups.
So I don't see it yet. I think, do either of you see the breakout room icon in the bottom yet? I don't see it.
No.
No,
No.
this
It's
this
going to be a
was-
minute or two. So while Pablo finishes that, I'm going to share my screen for a minute, if you don't mind, because I want to follow up on what David talked about. Can you see that yet?
Says seat at the table.
Now, let me do it again here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the issue of the youth participation. Can you hear me all right?
Uh-huh. Just hang
Yep.
on a second. Pablo, how are we doing with the breakouts?
good. Rick has time.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm having a little challenge here. I can see everybody here. I can see the people, but not my opportunity to do the breakout or the screen share. Anyhow, what I was going to say is there is a campaign for Presidential Youth Council now going forward. I don't know if any of you heard this.
We see
But
your screen. We see your screen.
See it. We can see it.
Oh, you see it? Okay,
The seat at
good.
the table, that one?
Great. Okay. So I just wanted to mention, in light of what David said and Rick Harry Moody said, of the great mistrust out there that seems the radical mistrust. Youth now are feeling that they need to create a forum, an official forum called the Presidential Youth Council, to have their voices be heard. I think it's a wonderful development, but it also speaks to the radical distrust that they are not thinking their voices are being heard. So one of the things we really want to do in the CoGeneration project is create a space to hear their voices.
Thanks, Rick.
So I just wanted to mention that, but how are we doing, Pablo?
Good. Just one more minute.
Okay.
A little time to set up the groups because you can only do it when people are actually in the Zoom. And we had a sort of breakdown that we put together, but it's a very dynamic process because sometimes people can't come and sometimes people are joining us that we didn't hear from yet. So I think we're just about ready.
Yep, they're about to open right now.
Okay.
See you all in 30 minutes.
All right. Thank you, Pablo. Recording paused.
Okay, it's recording now.
Recording again. Excellent. Okay, so what we want to do within the next 15 minutes, if it goes faster, that's fine too, is so each of us who took notes, first we'll go through the first question. And so maybe I'll do mine so I can try to model doing this quickly. So I'm going to look at, it's 10:24. I'm going to set a little timer if you don't mind, just so I know I want to just spend a minute. It just helps me create a mindset of how long a minute is to speak. So in our group, on the first question, is there mistrust? There were variations. certainly the yeses said that part of the mistrust can come from people having different sources of information. Uh, Perhaps older generations are more likely to do certain kind of research or follow different news sources, whereas younger generations may be more likely to look at social media sources and if you will, people that they trust. And an interesting comment came up about if older generations are not on the social media sources that the younger people are using, then they don't see their voices and they don't know what they're thinking or feeling. So there is some agreement that there is a sense of mistrust because people have different sources of information that they trust or don't trust. I also heard a discussion which was very interesting about, oh my gosh, that was too fast, vertical groupings. So people even across generations, but they might be within a family and they're somewhat in alignment about their attitudes and beliefs, but then they look at other uh, people in a vertical alignment and they say, we don't know how these people, have these beliefs or don't understand this and so on. So, and then there was finally about sources of misinformation. So mistrust can come when there's misinformation. So now I'll ask Rick Lathrop, and then Rick, you can pick who you want to ask next to give their harvest.
Okay, so I'm going to watch the clock, try to get this in with a minute. Yes, various views of mistrust among different organizations. We fortunately have a millennial in our group. I don't know if she's still with us, but she talked a little bit about boomers talking down to younger people. And so that creates mistrust. John Ruffin is a consultant, and he gets frustrated when he goes into corporations and sees all these young people with all their energy and young people and old people not tapping into that curiosity as much as he'd like to see. He's a big millennial fan, which I am too. And one interesting comment about mistrust, it goes both ways, because Maria, who helps families through transition, says that older generations have a bit of concern that may go into mistrust. One, worried if the younger generations will be able to take care of them as they've tried to take care of their older family members. So it's a complex picture, and that'll be it for me. And I guess we're going to Harry Moody next.
Yeah, I was in two different breakout groups, and the first one really had a lot of doubt about mistrust because they said, well, this might be true for the larger world with corporations or government, even paranoia, perhaps justified, but not for a smaller world, the family and people you know personally. So we really have to look at the domain in which mistrust arises. There's also the question of, is it even correct to speak about radical distrust? I didn't tell my group that I was the guy who came up with that phrase, radical distrust, but I'll say it now. That doesn't mean I'm wedded to it, because what I said in both groups was, is this really the right way to talk about it? Maybe this is the wrong way to think about it. I deliberately did that because I like to argue against myself. I'm a philosopher by background. So the question is, maybe it isn't distrust, it's misunderstanding or misinformation, or maybe, as one person said, competition for jobs. Might be a lot of different things. And what I took away from both these groups is that it really depends upon how we frame this question. And if we do it wrong, we're going to be launched in the wrong direction. So I think CoGenerations is going to have to think about this quite a lot, quite a lot. I'll end there. The last person is David Willis.
Thanks so much, Rick. And I want to follow up on your framing. I think the framing is what we are attempting to do. And of course, with the new president and vice president in the United States, there is this opportunity for a new framing going forward. Yeah. And there's certainly struggles here. Just a mention too about radical distrust and mistrust, that much of it is driven by social media, which of course things that are divisive are grab people's eyes quicker. So yeah, the algorithms are tuned into that. At the same time, yeah, as some of our participants mentioned, the electronics bring us together. in a lot of ways. Here we are in this
Right
space
now.
from so many different places right now,
Yep.
and our groups, there was a lot of passion and compassion, I should say, from everybody. There was a lot of talk about different generations, children, grandchildren, older folks who are out there. And I like Joa's mentioning about metaphors of meaning. And we're all looking for those metaphors of meaning out there. And the technology is a struggle for us. I mentioned that gaming has now taken over from music as the main preoccupation of younger folks. And I don't know much about gaming. So I guess, as Adam is indicating from his church, everyone reaches out to each other. So you have reciprocity as a basis of all this. And Carl was sharing too that there are many organizations like Toastmasters and Socrates Cafe and Kaja, I think you called it, Carl, organizations where people do reach across to each other. And I think there's a lot of hope going forward here. There's a lot of hope. And I, I do want to emphasize the intersectionality, the intersections that we have happening, the intergenerational, of course, the intersections, and a lot of other different ways, and interspecies too. Michelle had her puppy appearing on the screen while we were talking, and I thought we can't leave the animals out. We gotta have the animals in this too.
That's good.
Yeah, and to think about how we're treating animals too. I mean, the number one animal on Earth right now, it's not us, it's chickens. And there are more chickens than anything else on the planet. And of course, they get consumed. Anyway, I won't go on that, but it's important. But transformation is a theme that we kept hearing over and over again too. Thank you again, Joao, for that. Pechakucha, yeah, Pechakucha, okay. That began actually right here in this part of Japan where I live. I guess that's it for my side here. Just a few thoughts. I'm sure there was a lot more.
You did, you covered both of the questions in what you just shared?
We edged into hope.
No, that's great because then I can circle back and I'll, without having had any time to actually synthesize this, but just from the notes that I took here on hopes and dreams, one of our group members in what was the group 2 for me is pretty well versed in Bohmian dialogue. David Bohm, it's Bohm, correct? If somebody wants to put that in the chat. And who I've been exposed to because of Rick Lathrop, who knows somebody who worked with the late David Bohm, who was a physicist, I believe, and
Yes, he was.
had some principles that included deep listening, and we even had our period of silence towards the end because they said, anyone else have anything to say? And you know how that always generates silence, which is actually good because then people can collect their thoughts. But silence, I'm not sure I'm doing this in the right order, but respect for people, their humanity, suspending judgment, being curious about them, and then finding voice. So there's the listening, but also finding the deeper voice, not just the intellectual voice. And then Maria mentioned step 0, like agreeing even on a process for being able to dialogue and to make sure that everyone gets heard, turning the conversation into reality or action. And then Allison mentioned, what does it take to prepare for frank conversation? So there's a lot that goes, it's a little bit like, I don't know how many of you are aware, like the digestive process starts before anything goes in your mouth. It starts with like right now I'm really thirsty and I don't have enough to drink, but just even, anticipating what I'm going to consume. And then, all the way through, we all know through the elimination process. So really identifying what does it take to create the steps where people feel optimistic and feel that they can have discussions with each other. And I love Rosa. I just wrote down, everyone has their blind spots. It's okay to say ouch. Because we will be stepping on others' toes. It's inevitable, because if you don't have a dialogue, then everyone's just agreeing and you're not really understanding each other. So those were um, the main points that I wrote down from our second discussion. And Rick or Harry/Rick, do either of you have anything else to add? Because we're doing really good on time. We've been quite efficient in our harvesting here. And then we'll open it up for comments that other people made that we may have missed. Yes, go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, well, I just want to comment to John, and I saw the note in there about Bill Isaacs carrying on. I actually am an old friend of Bill's from many, many years ago, and I've talked to him about the CoGenerations project, and he said he'd be happy to help, although he's really busy right now. And there's a couple of fielding grads that actually have been working with him, Perry Chickering and another. So the whole Bohemian dialogue thing, I'm very interested in too, John. So I'm glad that you're very interested in that. So from our group, how can generations share and build hopes and dreams for the future? Fernando's brought the obvious and said, well, first we need to take care of the immediate, the pandemic, which I think we all understand. And then after that, he talked about how we need to increase understanding among people, which I think is a huge issue as well. Tim questioned whether people are actually talking much about hopes and dreams for the future because they're so involved in dealing with the crises. And Fernando, who has son 34 and daughter 31, gets together with them every Sunday, and they talk a lot about hopes and dreams for the future. And he's learned through some of their friends, some of that age group are questioning, should they even have gone to college? Did it make sense? They're competing with master's and PhD students now. Why did they even do it? And then we talked a little bit about the need for trade schools and other means of education. Dawn talked about her work in the folk school, and she's surrounded by people who are talking about it all the time. And she's actually going to have a conversation around the country about these issues soon, which I'm really interested in hearing about. And Deb talked about the importance of storytelling being the key, and talked a little story about her self-made father, which was moving. And then Dawn mentioned, yes, when we tell our stories, then we need to ask the young people, what do you want your stories to be? So, and Fernando said, yes, and youth not only want to hear those stories, but they want us to record them. So we had some really good ideas coming out of that. So that'll do it for that summary.
Thank you, Rick. And Rick Moody, was there, Rick Moody, was there anything else? I wasn't sure if you did.
No, I think people have touched on the relevant themes that seem to recur.
Okay, great. So, we have 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes that we allotted for our kind of wrap up, other than just before we go into anything like next steps and so on. Before I do, because I know some people may need to sign off before we finish. We have, thanks to Rick Lather, a Excel spreadsheet. So when people had replied with their, what they have background in and their, bio information, we wanted to share that with everyone because it was great to see it all in one place. If anyone does not want that shared, either just message me now and we'll just take you off, or email me by tonight, because we'll probably do that tomorrow. But it was really exciting to see what your expertise is that you bring in, and we hope we'll bring forward. So was there anything from the breakout groups that anyone felt we overlooked, or even feedback about how that worked for you? We tried very much to make sure everyone had a chance to speak, but that's a facilitation skill. Not all of us are as what would you call it, skilled in that as others.
Well, one theme I'll mention, and that is that we most of the people in this process are from the United States, but not all. So in the two groups that I was in, one person was from Canada and one person was from Uruguay. And that prodded me to think about the way in which we as Americans, I'm speaking for myself definitely, are unconsciously ethnocentric. This relates to the fact that we began with the inauguration. And David Willis knows this because he speaks fluent Japanese and has lived in Japan, taught in Japan in Japanese for decades. Okay. I know it because I subscribe to Le Monde and read it every day to improve my French. I learned Persian in order to read Rumi in the original. I've been in Iran. This is unusual for Americans to know Japanese or Farsi, or to be tuned in quite that way. And it used to be that our national newspapers, even the New York Times, covered global events more extensively than they do today. It's a paradox that we're living in an increasingly global world, and yet we may understand less and less about the world, and the world may understand less and less about Americans. I hope that's not true, but I fear that it is. And that's why I want to put that out.
I agree with you. Growing up, my father's from Argentina, so is my mom. That being said, one thing he did teach me at a young age is when he looked at the news, he read everything. He got articles. Once the computers came in, he read news from other countries to see, what's going on in the world and what they think, not just what we're getting from the United States. And I grew up doing that. And it actually helped me when I was working military intelligence, because it's like, what's really going on and what do people think? Well, one thing, going back to one of the issues we had for us is, and I'm sure those that live in other countries understand this, is when it comes to trust of what's going on, other countries look at us for guidance, but yet they don't trust us.
That's the paradox.
A lot. And I'm like, okay, but when they put out the news, where when we put out the news, we're going to put out what we need to put out. Now, I'm not saying that they're going to put out what they want you to hear, but it's not everything that goes on in the world. And I think that's going away. I think even with the internet, today's generation is not looking out at what is going on in the world. They're looking at what is going on in this little circle. What are we doing? Like, if you're in the Bay Area, you're going to concentrate everything in the Bay Area. And I mean, in California.
Yeah.
And I found in a different pocket. DC, everything's with DC when I lived out in DC. But they don't look at what's going on out in the world. So I think it's, before when you read the newspaper, you saw everything. Now you're reading on the internet, everybody's focusing on the US only, that I see. Now, I might be wrong, I hope I am, but, and then that's gonna drive how our nation and the world goes.
Yeah.
I'd like to offer a perspective, not only from the 27 years I was working, 50 trips to 27 different developing countries, made a lot of friends, in touch with them even now. This morning, as we were preparing for this event, I got a text from my good friend, named his son after me in Kenya. He texted, "I'm watching the inauguration right now."
The inauguration.
That was live. So 2 points. One is, what I've learned in the last 27 years is, whereas there's distrust of governments, people to people love each other. And people in foreign countries love American people. They may mistrust the government, but even in Iran, Harry, I know some friends who were Peace Corps in Iran, they love. So that's one issue. The other issue about not paying attention to what's going on because we're so focused on what we have to deal with, absolutely true. However, I see hope, because when I spoke to that young high school leader who's now nationally known, he said something very interesting. He said, we have changed the old saying that you guys used to have, think globally, act locally, to act locally, think globally. So the emphasis for them is to act locally. That's what the young people apparently are really interested in, addressing the local issues, but put it in a global context. So I see hope in the young people that they are still thinking about things more globally. Maybe some of the others of you have experience with older people or with younger people about that.
That's great. That's great.
I think Rosa had a point that she wanted to make, and also had a note in the chat.
Yeah, actually, there's two different conversations here, but regarding what, I don't know how you pronounce your name. Is it Fernando or Fernando, or are you Italian or Spanish or whatever? Anyway, beautiful name. But you were talking about the importance of, and I too stutter sometimes. I stuttered a lot as a kid and I stutter less now, but one of the many reasons I'm very happy about our new president. But anyway, I, I really appreciated what you were saying about the importance of reading other newspapers. And I wanted to just say that there's an open source intelligent movement that was created years ago by a former director of the CIA. And I want to acknowledge how much growing respect some of us progressive and lefties have now for institutions like the CIA and the FBI who, track down potential lots of violence and all that. So
Right.
we are all growing and learning. And yeah, so that, and then in terms of the dialogue piece, I just did want to say that dialogue is a global phenomenon that has roots in many places, and I will be glad to offer stuff on that. So, thank you.
Thank you, Rosa.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I think sometimes it's just around the corner and we miss it. For instance, it's easier to say, so maybe we are ethnocentric, and by the way, I speak Persian and that and that and that. It's more difficult to say, okay, but we have 2 people or 3 people that are not from the States. Let's really listen to them. Instead of listening to ourselves, trying to move to the space that other people is. And that for me, it's my experience in relating not only to the States, but also to Americans, is that it's difficult to really listen to the other perspective, particularly when that perspective doesn't comply with the frames of mind that the other people have. And we had an experience here.
Yes, yes. I want to weigh in a little bit on that as well, because I'm just having nice memories of last time I saw you, I think was in Santa Barbara, Joao, and just really miss not being able to get that great big hug from you. But I have a friend who's actually turning 100 tomorrow. Everybody who knows me knows I talk about
Oh,
Erin
yes.
Leon. She's in a nursing home,
Yep.
is in isolation from COVID, but she's been through a lot anyway. But she's from Hungary and came to the United States when she was 70. And it's really interesting to watch talk about culture. So many of the nurses, the Jewish home in Reseda, California, it's very close to an Armenian community. So whereas different parts of the country, long-term care workers might be Latino, which is also very common here, Filipino, African American, and so on. But when you have different people who come from different backgrounds and different languages, and you're trying to communicate around the most intimate parts of their care, that's when I really see how important it is for people to sit and a lot of times people just nod and they really don't understand what she's saying. But I wanted to mention, I put in the chat, there's this movie called Free Trip to Egypt, and I heard about it actually through the yoga community. Oddly enough, I think they were helping to get the word out. It came out maybe a couple years ago, and I've now seen it twice. And a young man, well, in his 40s, I guess, at the time, from Canada, who's a Muslim who was working in Europe. And when Trump came into power, he felt like there was so much, anti-Muslim sentiment. So he sponsored, I think, about 8 or 9 Americans to go to Egypt and match them up with different families and so on. And of course, as you can imagine, and I'm coming back to Joao's point, or someone might have been prior as well, but integrating these points, if people sit down and spend time together when it's more personal experience, it's very, very different than having more abstract talks about, this generation or that person and so on. So I raised the question, and maybe this is the time to talk about, what are our next steps, but how do we move forward with this, idea about dialogue and facilitating dialogue at this very seminal moment. That's why I felt really glad that Barbara Mink, a la Nancy Pelosi, said, we're going ahead. This is what we planned. People signed up. We're going to do it. And that we didn't change, but we can do more going forward. And so, I just want to open it up to people's thoughts, ideas, as well as any potential commitments to work with us on what may happen next. That's a lot. I know I just said about 4 different things at least, but
One thing I did want to bring up was the summer session. It was Carl with a K, Melanie with 2 N's, and Michelle with 1 L. But we were in every single session together. Even Dorothy led a women entrepreneur leadership and entrepreneur and stuff. So I actually went to that one too. I was male, just sitting there. I didn't say a word, just listen. So getting back to files, but we have that men and women's one, but maybe we split it and all the men sit in the room and listen to women and vice versa. It might be something for our next time.
Idea.
I just second all the things that João and Fernando said. I've got wonderful friends throughout Europe and South Africa, and I always learn more about what's happening here from their observations, their view, and they send me their articles and whatnot. I value that international perspective and how much they pay attention to what's really happening here that we may not be getting through our own press, but I treasure the reports from BBC and Al Jazeera as well. And so totally celebrate the international view on what we're all about.
Great. Thanks, John. Rick Lathrop, because, circling kind of back to where we started, you've seen this initiative kind of leap forward, stall, a little bit like Sisyphus. From what you've gleaned today and what you've been experiencing, and also this technology, which is probably going to be the same for some, I would guess, summer session, there's not likely to be in person. So in terms of, opportunities within the fielding community, but also networks that you've heard people share about, you have some thoughts about what you'd like to see going forward.
Right. Well, first, what really becomes evident is that we're not only all very busy people already, most of you working on your PhDs, some of you working, having families. On top of this, we've got COVID. On top of it, we've got the economic problems. We're in a challenging time right now, and I want to acknowledge that. So I understand why you aren't jumping up and down and saying, yes, I can do this, I can do this. You guys are all already very busy at doing your thing. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is just acknowledging the work that everybody's already doing, because we're all involved in this some way or another. And one thought we had was, and I mentioned it a little before, is because some of the young people have said it, I've heard it now from at least 2 different sources, they'd like to hear our stories. So we're trying to put a website together. We have a little bit of funding, not enough to support a person I'd like to see support, which would be an intern, or even, I guess I'm the nominal kind of progenitor director for now, which I'm happy to do for the time being, but I'd love to have a young person step forward. We do have a millennial that is starting to step forward, and she's starting to work with us on social media. And we had an hour with her, Harry, Rick Moody, and I, and we learned so much in that hour about social media. I now have a TikTok account, and I know that that's not about a clock. So, there's a lot we need to learn from the young people as well. So I'd like to also, and maybe you can help in this, hear the stories of some young people. Those of you that have been working with young people, I'd love to hear. I'd love to interview some of them, get them on our website, we're thinking of doing is maybe have on our social media weekly posts, and the TikTok, it's only for a day. So, we're trying to figure that out, but other social media. So those are some things that have come to mind. So I just want to acknowledge what you all are doing already, that you're busy. We will keep you informed. I'll get you all on a mailing list, and when we start doing updates, you'll get them. But if any of you have some interest, and one of the things that Connie and I have talked about a little bit is, could we actually create some knowledge areas for students to be involved in this, and actually have them do some of the research work, some of them do some of the work that they're interested in, and let them have that credit towards their degree. That's one area that we'd like to explore further. You all, when I put together this Excel file, which I will send to you, of your answers to all the questions, the 2 questions that we asked, wow, there's an incredible resource of people that I'm seeing right here, and love to tap into them, but realizing the reality of how busy we all are, what's really practical at this point. So I guess we're still trying to figure it out, Connie. We're in a process. I keep reminding myself that it took me 27 years to get Global Service Corps to its present state, and it took about 15 years actually to get it to a point where I was actually kind of proud of what we were doing. So, I mean, I'm just starting on this. I'm 4 years younger than our president, so I got lots of time. So, I think we can all look at it that way too. And John, I'm glad to hear that you're a youth forever. I'm trying to adopt that attitude too. So, anyhow, those are some thoughts, Connie, and I'd like to hear some responses to that, if possible, from some.
I would like to have a conversation with you and Connie, maybe of proposing an intergenerational photo voice project, because I think that's a beautiful way to engage voices and get dialogue going and to build deeper understanding. And I think it's fun, it's engaging, and it's also very informative, and it's community participatory action research. So it fits all your criteria. So yeah, I would love to stay connected and have that conversation, because that's one of my biggest interests is photo voice. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is Deb. I'd love to participate too, even though it's not my quote unquote degree path. It's very much a passion, and I have become really aware from my son and his friends who are in the 30-33 age group, especially white males, are really having a really hard time right now in that age group, trying to figure out how they need to be and behave, and what diversity and inclusion means for them. And they've shared some really interesting experiences, and it's something that I think it's a conversation that needs to happen in a way. So that's my 2 cents.
Deb, I put in the chat because I saw I had to scroll up about, what is considered young. And Rick Moody, whose book I mentioned at the beginning, Aging Concepts and Controversies, has a whole section pretty much towards the beginning about age, period, and cohort. Can you do a Cliff Notes version of that? Because see, these are social constructs. Age, what does it mean to be even a boomer? Some people don't want to. I don't want to be called a senior, even though I'm glad now that I'm 66 I can get the vaccine. But other than that, I don't go to senior centers and so on. Rick Moody, can you
forget the labels? Just think about when people grew up, the world that they grew up in, and the world that we're living in now. Those are the 2 issues, along with their age. Okay, I'm 76 years old. That's not the only fact. The other fact is the world that I'm living in right now and the world that I grew up in.
Mm-hmm.
The 1950s.
Any other comments from other of our participants?
Yeah, Rick, I'd like to participate in that. And it kind of has something to do with my PhD, kind of that realm, going that route. So yeah, keep me posted. And I think when you do that, bring some international students to get a different perspective that'll give a complete picture. And I think that will help. So those are my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Well, we did it. We did it. We did what we had planned, and
we're on time.
those of us who were able to join in and hear any parts, including Garth Brooks, and now I'll have to go back and watch all the things that I missed on the inauguration. But I'm really, really deeply grateful to everybody for coming and participating and sharing, and look forward to our future gatherings.
And our expert chat man, David, are you going to grab the chat and we could maybe make that available to people? Great. I knew he was on
Yeah.
that. I didn't even
Yeah,
need to ask
the
him.
chat, I will actually, I'm saving the chat right now. I believe everybody can save it on their own as well. If you
Can.
go to the three little dots to the right of everyone, but I'm saving it for our group here. So, because we've got a lot of good links in there. So anyway, have a wonderful rest of your day, and so much gratitude. And thank you
Okay.
again, Rick and Rick and David, for
Bye-bye.
leading this together. All right. And if the faculty want to stay on for a minute just for a debrief, I know David probably wants to go to sleep, but
Yeah.
It's okay.
Good night, David.
It's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Namaste.
Thank you, John. Laura, Carl, Adam.
I'm going to get
Yeah, no,
something to drink. I'm
Patrice.
super thirsty, and my leftover tea from yesterday has long since been gone. So I'll be right back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carl.
Good to see you again, Rick Moody, and nice to meet you, Rick. And
Bye-bye.
Before you go, how do you pronounce your last name?
Habenstreit.
Thank you.
Good German name.
Good German name. Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Let's see where.
Good. Now I can start to turn my attention to my tomorrow night workshop. So, which is a little more presentation oriented rather than process oriented. So, anyway.
Carl, you're welcome to stay, but I think the lower right, if you put your icon down there, there's
Yeah, it vanished on me here. So I would love to kind of stay and stuff.
Okay.
This is my bread, and I've got connections to so many people, so I'd love to listen in, and I'm glad to see you're still recording.
So do we
Oh, we should
show
maybe
show 'em the
turn off the
secret?
recording though.
Oh yeah, let me turn the recording off, right? In case we wanted to share this with anybody. I don't think we need to be recording.
Yeah, because the session itself is over. So,
Right.
Yeah.